Ragamuffin Patterns. Today we are working on a small modification to the Western collection, and this modification is just leaving the collar stand off. It's going to create a different style of collar, slightly different look. I like 40s style women's dresses, shirt dresses like I'm wearing here, so that was the inspiration for this pattern modification. It's fairly simple. It works for all the patterns, the little buckaroo, little lady, the men's good old boy, and women's outlaw. This is a great modification to make if you want something more like a bowling style shirt or something a little more casual than a traditional button down with full collar stand. This is knit interfacing. This is something that I found when I was creating the Outlaw Lady pattern. It stretches slightly in one direction. So if I hold it this way and I pull it, you can see it stretch slightly this way. If I go this way, there's no give at all. Now if I go on the diagonal or bias, you're going to get the greatest stretch. And that's why I like this for knit fabric. The Western collection is drafted for knits, with the exception of the little buckaroo and the good old boy. Those are both drafted for either or woven or knit fabrics. Specifically with knits though, you do want an interfacing for your collar and for the button-down placket in front. You want that because it gives structure. It'll give structure to your fabric. And knit interfacing is flowy, and it lets the fabric do its thing. It lets it hang the way it needs to hang, and it lets it move and stretch in the manner it's supposed to. At the same time, giving it a nice structure underneath to stay pointy where it needs to be pointy and stand up when it needs to stand up. There will be a link to the knit interfacing in the description of this video, so if you need to find that, I haven't found it at my local stores, but it is available on Amazon, so I will put a link to that. Let's come over to my cutting table and I will show you how to modify this pattern. Okay, so I've already cut my front and my back. Since we're doing the button-down style, I have 2 front pieces and 1 back piece. If you're making any style that needs panels or whatever, construct everything and then we're going to make the modification. So you have 2 choices. You can do a fully lined front, which is what we're going to do today, or you can do just a facing. I'm going to show you the fully lined and then I'll show you how to cut the facing. So fully lined is going to be a lot simpler. It's basically I'm cutting 2 identical pieces to the front. So this is going to be my lining. I have 2 identical pieces, just like I have the front pieces, only I didn't use the panels for my lining. My lining is also going to have the interfacing running down the front of it. That is to give the fabric more stability for when you add your buttons or snaps. If I was going to make a facing, I wouldn't cut an entire front piece. I would cut, I'm going to use this for an example, I would cut about 1 inch over from the shoulder seam line and a slight angle following the panel line. And this skinny weird piece will be my front facing, and that would attach to the front. You could then sew it into the seam if you would like later. That's how we would do the front facing. The back, so for my back piece, since we're doing the fully lined, I'm going to go and I'm going to cut a whole entire second back piece. It's identical, except we don't have the panels for this one. If I were going to be making the facing, so I would make the front, that weird angle piece. I'm going to do the same on the back. I'm going to start just at the same spot you did on the front, about halfway over from the shoulder, only I'm going to make a scoop. You don't have to do an entire back piece, or you can cut this whole entire top piece. You don't need to do anything else to the back for the facing. You just need something for the collar to be sewn into. You're going to sandwich the collar in between the facing and your front, or the lining and the main pieces. So with that said, I am going to take my pieces over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew them together at the shoulder seams. Okay, so I've got my collar and I have sewn the shoulder seams to my lining. I have my main outer layer. Also, shoulder seams are sewn. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna make a little sandwich. We're gonna take our main outer pieces, we're gonna match up the shoulder seams, and we're gonna mark the center of the back. That's so we can center our collar. So that has a center mark. Now we're going to center our collar. Mark the center of the collar and the back. And right sides together if your collar doesn't really have a right side fabric. Just make sure that the facing side or the interface layer that's your right side. That should be touching the right side of your fabric. So we're going to pin that together there. Then we come over here to the shoulder seam. Shoulder seam gets pressed towards the back and also is lined up with this point on the bottom raw edge of your collar. So we're going to line those up. Pin that together. Keep moving around to the front. Now the front should be longer than your collar. Because if I were using the collar stand, that would fill that gap. But we're not doing that, so there will be some excess there. It should be roughly an inch. Maybe a little more for seam allowance and all. Okay, so we're going to mark that, or we're going to pin that in place there. We're going to do the other side, and then we're going to sandwich the lining pieces on there. After you have that collar on there pinned in place, just check to make sure there's the same amount in front. So there is. You don't want one to have more. Sometimes fabric can be stretched on accident, and that will, make things a little weird later on when it's done. So just make sure that it's even. So now we have our main outer fabric and our collar pinned together. This is the back, these are the front pieces. I'm going to take my lining pieces, whether it's the lining or the facing, whatever you're doing, and I'm going to mark the back center of my lining, and then I'm going to pin that on top to make a sandwich. Or to sandwich in the collar, see? So now the collar is in between these layers. Pin that. Come over here, this is the shoulder seam, so we're gonna line up our shoulders again. Pin that. Come around to the front. This should meet up with this piece. It does. So we're going to make sure we get all the layers. Make sure you get all the layers of your collar and main front and lining fabric together. It'll make it easier when you go to sew it. Okay, so now we're just going to repeat that with the other side. Run it around, match up the shoulders, match up the front, and then we're going to sew it. Make sure all the layers, there's 2 layers for your collar, a layer for your main outer fabric, and your lining layer. So you're going to have 4 layers of fabric, and make sure everything is lining up nice and neat. It will help you when you get to the sewing machine. So now that everything is there, when we take it to our machine, we're going to sew across the neckline. So across the neckline, and then you're going to sew down the front, down the front. And that's it. So you go around the neckline and then down both fronts. Okay, so I've just sewn all these layers together. The lining, the collar, and the main outer fabric layer. There you go. It's all done. Going to take my corners, okay, so I'm going to take my corners and pull them out. You can use a pin if you'd like. Just very gently grab. You can grab a straight pin and very gently work the seam out slightly so that it has a better shape. Okay, so I've sewn everything together, all the layers, and I've turned it right side out. I went across the back with the collar, and then I went down both fronts. So they're attached in the front and around the back. What is not attached, what is not sewn, are the armholes and the side seams. This is going to be a sleeveless dress. So in order to close it up in a nice way without having bulky seams on the inside, I'm going to go back, flip it inside out, and sew around the armholes. Okay, so here I have my armholes sewn up on this side and on this side. We're looking at the back of the right outer fabric. The front is up here with the split for the overlap for your button placket, for your buttons or whatever. So I'm going to take the front, I'm going to gather it up like this and pull it through the back. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. This is going to turn it right side out. Now that it's right side out, you'll see that our nice finished edge. I haven't decided if I'm going to top stitch it yet. That can wait. But what comes next is closing up this part. Obviously you have to attach the front to the back at the side seam. How do we do that without creating a huge bulky seam on the inside and an ugly part right here? It's very simple. We're going to take the bottom edge. So here's the front, this is the lining, and the main fabric in the back, right? Laying it on top. Both my lining sections, or both of my lining fabrics, the front and the back, I'm going to line them up together here on the bottom. You can pin that if you'd like. When I sew this together, I'm going to go up. This is the underarm seam. I'm going to go across that, and I'm going to follow it all the way to the other side. So I'm going to go do that, and I will come back to show you how it looks. All right, so here it is. It looks like a big jumbled mess, but and I will show you the difference here between this side that's finished, the armhole. Your nice side seam is all closed up now. This is going to need some top stitching. I want to try it on first just to see. But yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and top stitch around the armhole and down the front and around the collar. But this side is not sewn yet. And I will show you again in case you missed it. Lay the fabrics on top, just like they're supposed to be. I'm going to grab the lining layers, match them up. This is going to match up here. This is the underarm seam for the sleeveless holes. So I'm going to sew up to there. Then I'm going to sew around the back that way, matching up this bottom corner. So this is around, all the way around. Okay, so I've just done that second side. You'll see here it is all flat. This is the underarm connecting seam, and this is my side seam. If I turn it right side out, you'll see that. There it is. So again, because this fabric is very flowy, I am going to go ahead and go back and top stitch around, starting at the bottom. Oh, this is inside out. It's right side out. I'm like, why are there lines? Okay, so my lining doesn't have the panels, and I did that for a reason because I didn't want this line showing over here when we have it together. When it's all done and on, it's going to look something like that. It's going to be super cute. I just have to, I'm just going to go around and top stitch starting at the bottom, up and around the collar and back down the other side. Then I'm going to add my skirt, and this one will be all done. Don't think that the sleeves are going to need the top stitching, but I'll find that out after I try it on and see. Can always go back and do that later. Here I have an example. Let's take this away. This is the dress I was wearing when we started this video. I'm going to show you what the inside looks like since this has sleeves, and I did the front and back facing on this one. So the back of this dress, I cut an extra single point, and I sandwiched the back inside there. The front, see, I cut, it's not even, I didn't even sew it into the side seam. You can bring it over and sew it into the side seam, but I did a bunch of top stitching on this one, so this one did not get sewn into the side seams. But when I wear it, you can't tell. It doesn't flop around or do anything weird. But I did cut the top section and the front panel, sewed those together, sandwiched my collar in. Then I sewed everything else like normal. And the side seams are just single layer side seams. So everything is the exact same for this dress, except I cut the front pieces and the back piece and made the sandwich with those. So that's the only difference. It's pretty simple. And that's it.